To make it easy, I'm just going to pass the microphone around. So if you'll just say your name and then a little bit about you. So I am Lynn Hinton, and I'm the conference director of the New Mexico Conference of Churches. This is also my home church, so I welcome you on behalf of the members here at First Congregational. Very excited to be a part of this panel and to have the opportunity to hear from these young women who are doing the good work. So you'll introduce yourselves.
I'm Emma O'Sullivan. I'm an attorney. I work at Santa Fe Dreamers Project, which is a nonprofit serving refugees and immigrants across New Mexico and in the El Paso Juarez border region.
Hi everyone, my name is Arcelia Isaias Castelo, and I am also on the board with New Mexico Interfaith Power and Light as their treasurer, and I also work for the nonprofit called Renew Mexico and leading up the chapter in Arizona as well. We advocate for renewable energy.
Hello everyone, Cynthia Gonzalez. I'm from El Paso, Texas, and I work for the Missionary Society of St. Columban, where I'm in charge of doing their advocacy work around migration and environmental issues. And I'm also part of the board of IPL New Mexico El Paso region.
Hello everyone, my name is Kaylee Shoup. I'm a community organizer with Citizens Caring for the Future. We're a small grassroots environmental advocacy group, and I believe the only of our kind in Southeast New Mexico, and we work on oil and gas issues in the Permian Basin, and our group was actually born out of Interfaith Power and Light Faith Retreat back in 2019. So your work made my work possible.
So my first question, especially as we're thinking about caring for Mother Earth, is as each of you experiences something unique in climate change where you live and work, would you share with us what you're seeing on the ground, where you are? What are the climate change realities in your place on Mother Earth?
So as I mentioned, I live in the Permian Basin in southeast New Mexico, and that is the most prolific and active oil field in the country, if not the world. We kind of switch back and forth with Saudi Arabia. For those that don't know, the Permian Basin is a span of land that is southeast New Mexico and west Texas. That's always been an oil-rich area, but when fracking was invented, they figured out in about 2015 that they could get into a whole bunch of untapped oil reserves. So I believe we have the most untapped oil reserves of any basin in the world, and we also have the lowest break-even cost. So it's a really, really busy oil and gas region. Really meta-level, climate change-wise, we see where we are, we're in the Chihuahuan Desert, so we're seeing extreme heat and drought. But we really, where I live, get to see what is fueling climate change, right? And the devastation that that brings to a local community and then takes, to the wider world. And when you go around our area, the land is just scattered with pump jacks, pipelines, any kind of oil and gas infrastructure that you can really imagine. And it's really quite apocalyptic when you tour it. The local communities, we're seeing health impacts and just growth in our communities that we can't really sustain because it's a small town, right? So we're seeing a lot of environmental justice issues, things like that, along with climate change. Also, the Permian Basin is one of the greatest emitters of methane in the country, if not the world probably. I'm sure all of you are aware, but methane is an air pollutant that warms the atmosphere at 80 times greater strength than carbon dioxide. The good news about that is it doesn't stay in the atmosphere as long. So if we cut methane emissions, we can really, it's a trigger, right? So it can take down the temperature and help us avoid climate catastrophe to stay within that 1.5, 2 degrees Celsius. So there's a lot of devastation, but there's also, a lot of potential for change where I am. And yeah, I would say that's about the gist of what I'm seeing where I live and yeah, the impacts.
Yeah, in El Paso, similar to Carlsbad, we're also seeing extreme weather, severe weather, flooding, and droughts. We live in the desert, so there's also concern for our biodiversity in the desert as well, plants and animals. That's what I think we're seeing there. There's also some concerns regarding environmental justice, and we also have the oil and gas industry, some of in the communities there, and one of the most impoverished communities of El Paso. So there's also some environmental issues there. From my line of work, I also, it's being so close to the border, we're also seeing the international effects of climate change with seeing and receiving migrants who are coming from other parts of the world, Latin America, many people who are displaced because they don't have the same ways of living. Livelihood has been affected. They cannot grow their crops. They cannot do their usual work. So they are forced to migrate. Others because of the actual or the consequences already that they haven't. Hurricanes and all of their natural disasters that have happened in their countries. And we, at the border in our migrant ministry, we are observing those kind of scenarios where we can clearly identify that these people are coming as a result of these negative effects that are not only here but globally. And it just is very clear for us how we are just part of one community. So that's what we're seeing and what I can relate to from El Paso.
I reflect on this question very often because it's very interesting that in this line of work, I myself haven't personally seen the impacts of climate change or been affected. Like I have not been displaced by wildfires. My water is still accessible. So it's very interesting being in this position because I hear it through the stories of all the people that we work with. So I see it especially with water. I think that's one of the biggest, most prominent ways that I've seen climate change impacting our communities is by hearing farmers and how the water restrictions that are happening because of how the water flows are, like their livelihoods that they've had for generations are now at risk. And so I think for me that's kind of been the most prominent of the impacts of climate change is just this collective fear about having this uncertainty of the future. Because it's the water restrictions, it's the displacement, it's the extreme weather conditions, it's all these different aspects that are going to make the future be completely different from what we've known and what we've grown up with for several generations. So I think it's very interesting that I myself have not had that experience, but I see that and I just feel very called to continue elevating these people's stories and just showing how these impacts are through their eyes.
For me, I'm from Valencia County, and of course, like our relationship to water is historical and personal, and that's always like in the back of my mind is that like relationship to where I'm from. In my work, as an immigration attorney, we see a lot of folks. We work with a lot of folks who are crossing the border, and they cross the border for a lot of reasons, or want to cross the border. Although we've got Title 42 is still in place, which is the Trump-era border closure. And we basically, I see climate change kind of showing up in that context of, and it's like Arcelia says, which is that like we don't necessarily see folks who are like their home was burned down in a catastrophic wildfire that was caused by climate change. Maybe like the causes are a little bit more attenuated, but for example, in last year we saw a huge wave of Haitian migration, right? That was tied directly to hurricanes and natural disasters that were exacerbated by climate change. And so like in my work, the way that shows up is what does our legal system do with somebody who's coming here because their country is no longer inhabitable because of climate change? And the way that we responded to that was largely to slam the door shut on them and put them back on planes to those countries. And we're not the only country who does that, right? Like we're one of many countries who has this really rigid adherence to refugee conventions, right? That are largely about political beliefs or race, discrimination, that kind of thing. We don't have legal systems that are set up to catch climate refugees yet, right? Yet is the hope. So when I think about how is this showing up in my work, and it's like a lot like Cynthia talks about too, that we as legal advocates are trying to figure out how do advocate for individuals, and how do we report on that for systems change too. So I know we talk a lot with our congressional representatives about, hey, we're seeing folks who are coming here who need refuge, and our legal system doesn't recognize that yet. So what do we need the law changes to be able to adapt to this, because movement around the world due to climate change is starting. I mean, it's been, like since, well, for Haiti, for example, like since 2016, right? There's been like this huge Haitian diaspora that's happened because of conditions that happened due to hurricanes. We have countries in the Pacific who are buying land in other countries literally in anticipation of their homelands being flooded. And are those other countries going to accept climate refugees? Is like an open legal question, right? So really trying to think about how do we, there's this phrase that I read recently that really stuck out at me, which was anticipated climate genocide. And that's something that we can foresee, is this need to move that's going to be happening as the world grows warmer. And are we set up for that? Are we legally going to be accepting folks needing to move around the world, or are we going to be slamming doors shut? And that's sort of just an element of what my day-to-day work looks like. But that's something that I think about.